I still remember the last time I saw my grandmother alive. She lay in her bed, frail but proud, her eyes still as sharp as they had always been. Her hand, thin and trembling, reached for mine, and though her body was weak, her grip was steady. "My dear," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence of that room, heavy with the scent of lavender and medicine. "Remember, this loyalty is rarer than gold. I may not leave you much joy in my passing, but I will leave you truth, and the legacy you deserve." At the time, I didn't fully understand. I thought she was simply being sentimental, leaving me with words of comfort before she let go of this world. I had no idea her truth would ignite a storm that would change everything I thought I knew about family. When she took her last breath, a strange calm filled the room. My tears came, but deep down, I also felt something else. Something I couldn't name then. A weight, a responsibility, and perhaps a warning, because families, especially mine, rarely reveal their true nature until there's something worth fighting for. The funeral was somber, as expected, but beneath the veils, the black suits, and the bowed heads, there was tension simmering. My cousins, especially, their eyes darted more toward the lawyers who stood quietly near the chapel doors than toward the casket holding our grandmother. I could feel it. That hunger, that greed. Grandmother's estate had been the subject of whispered conversations for years. She wasn't just any old woman with a small inheritance to pass on. She was the matriarch of a sprawling piece of land, an estate that had history carved into its walls and wealth buried in its very foundations. The mansion, with its towering oaks, endless gardens, and silver-lined corridors, was more than property, it was power. And everyone in the family knew it. Everyone except me, perhaps. I didn't see it that way. To me, the estate was my childhood home, the place where I learned to ride a bicycle, where I picked apples with dirt-stained hands, where I cried when life fast broke my heart. I didn't see it as a crown to inherit. I saw it as roots, belonging, and the last standing reminder of the only person who had ever truly seen me. But to my cousins, it was a prize, and they were already sharpening their knives. Their reading of the will came a week later. We all gathered in the estate's library, a room filled with more books than I could ever count. The scent of aged paper heavy in the air. My cousin sat stiffly, whispering in little groups, eyes flickering toward me occasionally. Their smirks carried a kind of confidence that made me uneasy. I sat quietly in the corner, my hands folded in my lap, my grief still too raw to be masked by anything else. When the lawyer began, the room fell silent. The words rolled out slowly, carefully, as though they carried the weight of centuries. And perhaps they did. My grandmother, in her wisdom, had left small tokens to various relatives, gifts, heirlooms, little pieces of memory stitched into physical form. But then came the part that silenced the room completely. The estate, the lawyer said, clearing his throat, including the house, the lands, the trusts, and all holdings shall be left to my granddaughter. The air thickened. My cousins' faces froze. To her, for her loyalty, her dedication, and her unwavering presence by my side, the lawyer looked up at me. My name was on his lips. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Me. The room erupted not in applause, but in chaos. I can still see the way their faces twisted. My cousin Samuel, the eldest, slammed his hand on the table so hard the glasses of water rattled. His sister, Evelyn, gasped dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest like she'd been stabbed. The younger ones exchanged glances, their jaws tightening, their whispers venomous. Me. The quiet one, the one they dismissed, the one who never demanded a thing now held everything they thought belonged to them. And in that instant, I understood. Their eyes weren't just angry, they were dangerous. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice again. Loyalty is rarer than gold, she had known. She had known they would despise me for this. And she had chosen me anyway. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the estate pressing down on me. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the mansion. It was about what it meant. Power shifts in families are not quiet. They are earthquakes, and I was at the epicenter. I didn't yet know the full scope of what my cousins were capable of. But I could feel it, the storm brewing. And I was right, because within days, their smiles disappeared. Their false condolences turned into veiled threats, and slowly, they began to plot, not to share, not to reconcile, but to ruin me. First, it was subtle. Whispers at social gatherings. A cold shoulder from people I had known for years. Invitations that suddenly didn't arrive in my mailbox. I didn't understand at first until I realized my cousins had been speaking behind my back, planting seeds of doubt, twisting stories, crafting lies. She doesn't deserve it. She manipulated grandmother in her final days. Can you imagine? She barely contributed to the family. Their words spread like wildfire, consuming everything in their path. And though I told myself I didn't care, a part of me did. Because betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from those you once trusted, and betrayal always burns deeper than hate. But even then, even as their whispers sharpened into daggers, I remained quiet, because I knew something they didn't. I knew patience, and patience, when wielded properly, is sharper than any weapon. I listened. I watched. I let their lies dance around me like flames, and I waited, because sooner or later, every flame consumes itself. What my cousins didn't realize was this: every trap they set, every lie they spun, every plan they crafted was only fuel. And one by one, I would turn their schemes back on them. Not with rage, not with screaming, but with quiet, deliberate precision, because they thought I was weak, and that was their biggest mistake. I didn't have to wait long before the first stone was thrown. It came quietly, without warning like most betrayals do. I woke one morning to a string of messages on my phone. Friends, colleagues, even distant acquaintances, all asking the same question in different words: is it true? At first, I didn't understand what was true, and then I saw it. My cousin Evelyn had posted online a long, carefully worded message wrapped in false grief and dripping with poison. She spoke of how unfortunate it was that someone so undeserving had manipulated our grandmother in her final, fragile days. She hinted at unseen influences and questionable loyalties. She never mentioned my name directly, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. It was clever, cruel, and effective, because people love stories more than they love facts. And gossip. Gossip is the easiest story of all. Within days, I felt the shift. At work, my colleagues glanced at me differently, their smiles a little thinner, their conversations stopping the moment I entered the room. Friends cancelled plans, their excuses flimsy, their voices hesitant. The inheritance, the estate, had already made me the subject of curiosity. Now, Evelyn's poison made me a villain in their eyes. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I had always kept to myself, never craving attention, never demanding the spotlight. And yet here I was, cast as the antagonist in a drama I hadn't chosen. The worst part: my grandmother wasn't here to defend me, The one person who had believed in me most was gone. And her absence gave my cousins room to twist her memory for their gain. I considered fighting back, typing out a response, shouting the truth, screaming into the void of public judgment. But something inside me stopped, because I remembered her words. Loyalty is rarer than gold. If I started playing their game, feeding the gossip, arguing with shadows, I would only validate their lies, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I chose silence. But silence is not weakness. Silence can be strategy, and while they wasted their energy weaving lies, I listened, I collected, I learned. Their second attack came swiftly after. A call from my bank. My account had been flagged unusual activity, sudden withdrawals, debts I hadn't authorized. I felt my stomach sink as the banker explained. Someone had forged my signature on documents, shifting funds, creating the illusion that I was reckless with the estate's finances. And who stood to benefit from that illusion? My cousins. If I looked irresponsible, if I appeared careless with my inheritance, they could contest the will more easily. They could argue that I was unfit to manage what had been left to me. For a moment, I felt panic claw at me. What if they succeeded? What if I lost not just the estate, but my grandmother's trust, her legacy? But then, calm settled over me, because I realized something. They were showing their hand too early. Forgery, fraud, lies in public and paper trails in private. The more they schemed, the more they revealed, and I was watching. I started keeping records, screenshots of Evelyn's posts, emails mysteriously altered, bank notices, signatures that weren't mine. First, I kept them for my own sanity, proof that I wasn't imagining the war being waged against me. But soon, I realized this wasn't just proof. It was ammunition. They thought I was defenseless, that I was too quiet, too passive to fight back. What they didn't realize was that quiet people aren't weak. We're observant. We notice details others miss. We wait while others rush, and we strike when the moment matters most. But patience doesn't mean I didn't bleed. I did. Late at night, alone in the silence of the estate, I cried. The weight of their cruelty pressed down on me. The sting of isolation cut deeper than I expected. And sometimes I questioned myself, was I truly worthy of all this? Had my grandmother chosen right? But then I would walk through the halls she once walked, touch the worn banister she once held, stand in the gardens she once loved, and I would remember, her choice wasn't an accident. She had seen me, truly seen me, in ways my cousins never had. She had left this estate not as a prize, but as a shield, a weapon, a responsibility, and if I gave up, I would be betraying her faith. So I stood back up every time and wiped my tears, because this wasn't just my fight. It was hers. 2. The third strike came disguised as kindness. Samuel, the eldest cousin, invited me to dinner. I almost laughed when I received the message, but I accepted, because I wanted to see what mask he would wear this time. The restaurant was expensive, the kind of place where chandeliers glimmered above tables and waiters glided silently like shadows. Samuel sat there in his tailored suit, his smile wide, his tone dripping with false warmth. "I just want what's best for the family," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "This inheritance, it's caused tension. I hate to see us divided." I watched him carefully, my own smile small and measured. He leaned closer. "Why don't we find a solution? You keep the house, the land, but the trusts, the accounts, you could distribute those. Share them fairly among us all." Fairly, such an innocent word, used as a blade. He wasn't offering compromise. He was offering blackmail wrapped in diplomacy. Because I knew, behind his words, there was threat. If I refused, the attacks would escalate. And yet, I refused anyway, quietly, calmly, because compromise with snakes only makes the bite come sooner. His smile faltered that night, and I knew he would come for me harder. But here's the thing about pressure, it doesn't just break people, it also forges them. And every scheme, every lie, every poisoned word was forging me into something sharper than they could ever imagine. They thought they were breaking me down. What they were really doing was building me up, and soon they would regret every stone they threw. Because when I struck back, I wouldn't miss. I knew the legal battle was coming before the papers even arrived. The whispers in the air were too thick. The way my cousins avoided my gaze to telling so when the envelope slid under my door, thick with documents and stamped with their attorney's seal. I wasn't surprised. Still, my chest tightened as I opened it. Inside, their petition was clear. They were contesting the will, claiming undue influence, claiming manipulation, claiming that I had coerced my grandmother in her fragile final days. They called me a thief in legal language. They painted me as a liar in neat paragraphs. And once again, they twisted my grief into a weapon. When I first read it, my hands trembled. It's one thing to be slandered in whispers and rumors. It's another to see those same lies written in ink, stamped with signatures, filed in a court of law. For a brief moment, I felt small again. Just the quiet granddaughter who never raised her voice, who never demanded attention, who never fought back. But then I looked around me. I was in the library. My grandmother's library. The shelves towered above me, filled with her notes, her journals, her meticulous records of everything she owned, everything she valued. She had left not just an estate. She had left a map, a trail of truth, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't fighting alone. She had prepared me for this. The cousins were bold in court. Samuel stood tall, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. Evelyn wept delicate tears, speaking of her love for grandmother, how she had been robbed of her rightful share. The others nodded along, their performances carefully rehearsed, and the audience, the courtroom, listened. For a while, I wondered if anyone would believe me. I sat there quietly, letting their accusations fall one after another, painting me as the villain in their tragic play. But what they didn't realize was this: the quieter I appeared, the more their desperation screamed, and slowly, even the judge seemed to notice, because desperation is loud and truth doesn't need to shout. What truly unsettled me, though, was not what they said, but how they said it. The cracks were small, but they were there. When Samuel claimed I had manipulated grandmother in her final days, Evelyn interrupted. No, it wasn't just that. She had been isolating her for months. A contradiction, a slip. When one cousin insisted grandmother had promised him the estate years ago, another blurted, "That's not true," she told me. Their unity fractured, just for a moment. But I saw it. And I smiled inside, because greed is a chain that always rusts. Sooner or later, it breaks. Outside of court, the whispers grew louder. Maybe she really did trick her. I heard the cousins are suing. What does that tell you? She doesn't look like someone who deserves an estate that big. Everywhere I went, eyes followed me, judged me, condemned me, and yet I held my silence. I didn't run to defend myself on social media. I didn't beg for sympathy from friends, because I knew words wouldn't save me, proof would, and quietly, carefully, I gathered it. My grandmother had been a meticulous woman. Every decision documented, every conversation noted in her diaries. She had even recorded audio notes, leaving behind not just memories, but evidence of her intentions. And in those notes, I found the heart of my defense. One recording. Her voice soft but steady. I leave the estate to her because she has never asked for it. She has never demanded anything. And that is why I trust her with everything. Her words cut through the noise like light through fog. This wasn't manipulation. This wasn't coercion. This was choice. Her choice. I didn't reveal my evidence yet. No, I let the cousins think they were winning. I let them dig deeper, louder, more reckless with their lies, because the more they spoke, the more they contradicted each other, the more they fought to tear me down, the more they tore each other apart, and all the while I documented everything, screenshots, recordings, notes, piece by piece. Their downfall was being built by their own hands. But I won't pretend it didn't hurt. Some nights, lying in the grand but lonely house, I wondered if it was worth it. The estate didn't feel like a blessing anymore, it felt like a target painted on my back. The family I once tried to love had turned into vultures, circling above me, waiting for me to fall. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask them why. Why wasn't blood enough? Why wasn't family sacred? But deep down, I already knew the answer. Because envy doesn't see family. It only sees what it doesn't have. And envy will burn blood ties to ash if it means winning. One night, as I sat in the study, going over yet another set of forged documents they had produced, I heard something outside the window. Whispers, laughter, drunken voices carrying through the night air. I crept quietly to the edge of the window, heart pounding, and listened. It was two of my cousins, huddled near the garden wall. She'll break soon, one slurred. Samuel thinks he's the smartest, but when it all comes down, I'll get the bigger share, the other muttered. Yeah, let her carry the shame now. Soon, she'll have nothing. They laughed, but what they didn't realize was that I had recorded everything, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled, because this wasn't just a fight anymore. This was war. They thought the court was their weapon. They thought lies were their armor. But they forgot one thing. I was my grandmother's granddaughter, and she didn't raise me to surrender. She raised me to endure, and endurance, when sharpened by betrayal, becomes the deadliest revenge of all. The weeks that followed were like standing in the middle of a storm where every gust of wind was aimed at me. Every crack of thunder meant to break me down. The cousins weren't content with just legal battles anymore. No. They wanted blood. Not literal, not yet, but social, emotional, reputational. They wanted to erase me before the court could even decide. The first blow came in the form of a newspaper article. Front page. Bold letters. Inheritance scandal. Did she manipulate her grandmother? My picture sat beneath the headline, one they must have provided, because I had never posed for the photograph. I was caught mid-expression, half a blink, mouth slightly open, an image carefully chosen to make me look guilty, uncertain, conniving. The article quoted anonymous family sources. I didn't need to guess who those sources were. The story painted me as a schemer who had preyed on my grandmother's vulnerability. It hinted at financial misconduct, whispered of secret deals, even suggested I had isolated her from the rest of the family in her final months. It was fiction, every word of it, but the damage was real. That week, strangers approached me on the street not with kindness, but with suspicion. At the grocery store, I felt the weight of eyes on me, scanning me as if they expected me to confess my sins right there in the produce aisle. Neighbors who once smiled now avoided me. Their shutters drawn tighter, their greetings swallowed. It's one thing to be hated by family. It's another to be judged by the world. And in that moment, I felt like the world itself had turned its back on me. But pain, if you let it sit long enough, becomes something else. It becomes fuel. And I decided then I wouldn't just survive their games. I would play mine. I didn't deny the article. I didn't release a statement. I didn't argue or shout or beg for understanding. Instead, I leaked something else. A letter, one my grandmother had written only months before her passing. In her own neat, unmistakable handwriting. In it, she spoke not of manipulation, not of coercion, but of gratitude. She wrote about how I had cared for her when others did not, how I had been her constant when others drifted, how she trusted me, above all else, to protect her legacy. I didn't release the whole letter, just enough to cast doubt on their narrative, and doubt is a dangerous thing because doubt doesn't erase lies. It infects them. It makes people wonder, what if? And once people start asking what if, the story is no longer one-sided. The cousins panicked. Evelyn, always the dramatic one, posted again online. This time she was angry, her mask slipping. She accused me of forging the letter, but the more she screamed, the more desperate she looked, and desperation is never flattering. Even their allies began to question. Even the papers, hungry for scandal, began to wonder if perhaps the story was bigger than one side. The tide didn't turn fully. Not yet, but it shifted, and I felt it, of course. Desperation makes people reckless, and reckless people make mistakes. It was Samuel who crossed the line next. One night, I returned home to find the lock of my gate broken, the garden trampled. Inside, the study was in disarray, drawers pulled open, papers scattered. Nothing was stolen. Not money, not jewelry. No, they weren't looking for valuables. They were looking for proof. Proof that I had done something wrong. Proof they could use against me. But all they found was silence, because what they didn't know was that I had already secured everything: copies of my grandmother's records, her letters, her recordings, all locked away, untouchable. Their break-in gave me something better than evidence. It gave me leverage, because now they weren't just liars, they were criminals. I filed a report quietly. I didn't announce it, didn't shout it from rooftops. I simply let the record exist, because records, like seeds, grow in time, and when the day came, that report would bloom into something poisonous for them. But even in their chaos, not all of them stood firm. One cousin, Daniel, avoided my eyes in court. He didn't post online. He didn't speak as loudly as the others. And one evening, after the hearing, as I walked to my car, he stopped me. His voice trembled. I didn't want any of this. Samuel, Evelyn. They pushed me into it. I looked at him carefully, my face unreadable. Then why stay silent? I asked. He swallowed hard. Because family isn't supposed to betray family. The irony nearly made me laugh. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded. Family isn't supposed to. And then I left him standing there, his guilt heavy in the air. Their unity was breaking. Their lies were cracking. And the storm they had unleashed was starting to circle back on them. They thought they had cornered me, but in truth, I had been cornering them, and soon they would learn what it feels like to be hunted. By then, their attacks had become predictable. A rumor here, a forged document there, a sudden article or anonymous source whispering into journalists' ears. They thought they were clever, weaving lies as though the threads would strangle me. But the truth is, lies are fragile things. They don't last. They unravel when pulled at the right thread, and I had begun to pull. It started small. A quiet word to a journalist I knew would bite if fed the right morsel. A leaked document reel, this time that contradicted Evelyn's dramatic claims. Nothing big, nothing loud, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. The next article that appeared was not one they had expected. The headline asked, "Inheritance feud, who is really telling the truth?" It didn't clear me. It didn't damn them. But it introduced something they hadn't faced before: uncertainty. And uncertainty is poison to unity, because once doubt enters a group of liars, suspicion grows like mold. I could almost feel it. Samuel's narrowed eyes, Evelyn's defensive shrieks, the younger cousins whispering behind closed doors. Who leaked that? It wasn't me. Are you sure? They had begun to turn on each other, and I didn't need to lift a finger. But of course, they couldn't resist trying again. Their next move was bolder, riskier: a stage scandal. One morning, photographs appeared online. Photos of me, supposedly drunk at a bar, supposedly stumbling into the arms of a stranger, except they weren't me. The resemblance was close, yes. Deliberately chosen, but not close enough. Anyone who truly knew me could tell the difference, and that was the thread I pulled. Quietly, I had the images analyzed by a professional. Within hours, I had proof they had been manipulated. I didn't release the proof myself. No, I gave it to the same journalist who had already begun questioning their narrative. The story broke 2 days later. Inheritance feud deepens. False evidence exposed. The photographs that were meant to humiliate me had instead humiliated them, and suddenly, the cousins' greatest weapon, public opinion, was slipping through their fingers. The fallout was delicious. Evelyn posted frantically, claiming she had nothing to do with the photographs. Samuel insisted the media was twisting the truth. The younger cousins went silent, hiding in the shadows, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. Their own scheme had backfired, and in the wreckage, I saw it clearly. They weren't an army anymore. They were a collection of desperate individuals, each scrambling to save themselves, and desperate individuals make mistakes. That night, I sat by the window of the estate, looking out at the moonlit gardens, and I allowed myself a rare smile. For the first time since this war began, I felt something I hadn't felt before: control. Not complete, not final, but enough to know that their power over me was fading, and that soon, very soon, the scales would tip. But even as I savored that victory, I didn't forget the truth. Wounded animals are most dangerous when cornered, and my cousins were wounded badly. It was Daniel, the wavering cousin, who confirmed it. He called me late one evening, his voice low, almost broken. "They're fighting," he admitted. Samuel blames Evelyn for the photos. Evelyn swears it was Samuel. The others don't trust either of them anymore. "And you?" I asked. "I never wanted this," he whispered. "But it's too late. If I leave now, they'll turn on me too." For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But pity is dangerous. Pity makes you forget what people are capable of. So instead of comfort, I gave him only silence. And in that silence, I heard his regret. Their unity was gone. Their lies were failing. And all I had to do was wait, because time, patience, and truth are the deadliest weapons. And I had all three. But still there was a part of me that wondered, why? Why couldn't they let it go? Why couldn't they accept what grandmother had decided? The estate was never theirs to begin with. But then, as I looked around me at the grand walls, the shining chandeliers, the sprawling lands. I understood. To them. This wasn't just property. It was power, and people will destroy everything, even family. For power, what they didn't realize was this: power means nothing if you can't hold on to it, and slowly, surely, I was prying it out of their hands. Samuel was never the patient one. Where Evelyn thrived on manipulation and whispered lies, Samuel was a creature of action, reckless, impulsive, and dangerous. When their schemes began to unravel, I knew it was only a matter of time before he lashed out. And I was right. It began with threats. Anonymous letters slipped under my door. Phone calls at strange hours, the line heavy with silence. Then cut off before I could speak. They thought fear would make me fold, but fear had already burned itself out of me long ago. All that remained was resolve. One night, I came home to find the estate's front gates forced open. The heavy iron, twisted and bent, bore the mark of brute force. My heart thudded once, hard, but I didn't panic, because I knew I had been expecting this. I walked slowly up the path, every step steady, deliberate. Inside, the lights flickered. A window had been smashed. Glass glittered on the floor like ice, and there, in the middle of the grand hall, stood Samuel. His suit was rumpled, his hair wild, his eyes fever bright. He looked less like a businessman and more like a man unraveling. "This was supposed to be ours," he hissed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "You don't deserve any of this. You tricked her. You poisoned her against us." I didn't move. I didn't argue. I only looked at him, and in that stillness, I watched him falter. Because silence is more powerful than rage. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he shouted, turning everyone against us. "Spreading your lies." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Lies. That word again. Always that word. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small recorder. I pressed play. His voice filled the hall, tinny but clear. A recording from a week ago, when he had been drunk enough to boast to one of his allies, "We'll ruin her, bleed her dry, make her beg to sell. Once she's broken, the estate is ours." The recording ended. Silence filled the space again, thicker than before. His face drained of color. I slipped the recorder back into my pocket. "You see, Samuel," I said quietly, "the difference between us is simple. You talk, I listen." For a moment, I thought he might strike me. His fists clenched, his chest heaving. But then, he turned, storming out the broken door, his fury trailing behind him like smoke. I didn't stop him. I didn't need to, because that night had given me everything I needed: proof. The very next morning, I handed the recording over to the lawyer overseeing the estate. He didn't smile, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes as he filed it away. "Be patient," he said. "Men like him always destroy themselves when given enough rope." And Samuel, I knew, had been given plenty. But the real surprise came not from him. It came from Evelyn, the queen of poison-tipped words. The one who had stood so confidently against me at the reading of the will. She had always prided herself on control, on appearances. But control is fragile, and appearances crack when the foundation rots. It was Daniel who brought me the news. "They're done," he said quietly, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Evelyn went too far. She tried to frame Samuel for the photographs. He found out. Now he's threatening her. They don't trust each other anymore. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. So this was it. The betrayal I had been waiting for. Not mine. Theirs. The cousins had always painted themselves as united, but unity built on greed cannot last. The moment one saw a chance to save themselves at another's expense, it was inevitable, and now they were eating each other alive. I almost pitied Evelyn. Almost. She had spent her entire life sharpening words into knives, believing she could cut her way to power. But knives cut both ways, and Samuel had turned hers back against her. Soon, whispers began to circulate. Not from me this time, from within their own circle. Samuel accusing Evelyn of fraud. Evelyn accusing Samuel of violence. The others torn between them, no longer sure who to follow. The same public that once eagerly consumed their stories now turned away, tired of the spectacle. Their drama had become noise, and I remained untouched. I too was strange, really. For so long, I had lived under the weight of their attacks, every day a battle for survival, but now I barely needed to fight. They were unraveling on their own. All I had to do was wait and watch and be ready, because the final strike was coming, and when it did, I would not hesitate. By the end of that week, Evelyn and Samuel weren't even speaking to each other. Their alliance, once the greatest threat to me, was broken, and in its place was chaos. That chaos would be their undoing. Chaos is loud. It doesn't stay hidden for long. By the time another week had passed, the cracks in my cousin's alliance were no longer whispers behind closed doors. They were headlines, arguments spilling into public view, accusations flying where anyone could hear. What began as private venom was now poison in plain sight. Samuel accused Evelyn of fraud during a dinner gathering. His voice raised, his words sharp enough to slice through every mask of civility. Evelyn responded with fire, hurling insults across the table, her glass of wine trembling in her hand as she spoke of his violence, his recklessness, his failures. Their younger allies watched in horror, uncertain which sinking ship to cling to, and I watched in silence, a spectator to their undoing. I too was almost poetic, the very tools they had used against me turning back to consume them. But I didn't just sit idly by. No, I had been patient. But patience is not passivity. Patience is preparation, and I had prepared well. For months, I had quietly collected everything. Bank records Evelyn thought she had buried. Transaction trails Samuel believed erased. Messages they never realized I had intercepted. Piece by piece, I had built my arsenal, and now, while they tore each other apart, I released it. Not with fanfare, not with spectacle, but carefully, deliberately. One document slipped into the right lawyer's hand. One bank statement sent to the authorities. One email quietly forwarded to the press. I didn't need to shout. The evidence spoke for itself. The first to fall was Samuel. A fraud investigation opened against him, his accounts frozen, his business allies scattering like startled birds. He raged, of course, blamed Evelyn, blamed me, blamed everyone but himself. But fury cannot erase facts, and the facts were damning. Evelyn tried to distance herself, painting Samuel as the sole villain. But the trail didn't end with him. Her fingerprints were everywhere, on the bank transfers, the forged documents, the carefully orchestrated lies. It was almost laughable how carelessly she had left them. Perhaps she had been too confident, too sure no one would ever look closely. But I had looked, and once exposed, her empire of whispers crumbled faster than I could have imagined. Still, what struck me most wasn't their downfall. It was what I discovered in the process. Among the papers left in the lawyer's care, hidden in a sealed envelope marked with my grandmother's delicate handwriting, was something I had never expected. A letter, not just a will, not just instructions, but a message, written for me alone. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The ink faded, but the words clear. My dearest child, if you are reading this, it means the storm has already begun. I knew they would not accept my decision. I knew they would turn their envy upon you. But I also knew something greater. You are stronger than they will ever be. Do not fight as they fight, with malice, with deceit. Fight with patience. Fight with truth. For in the end, truth will always endure. And when the dust settles, you will not just inherit an estate. You will inherit peace. I read it once, twice, a dozen times, and with every word, I felt her presence again, her wisdom. Her unwavering faith in me. It was not just foresight. It was a promise. The promise steadied me in the days that followed, because the cousins did not give up easily, even cornered. Even exposed, they clawed and bit and screamed, trying to drag me down with them. But their desperation was transparent now. The world could see it. Their allies had abandoned them. Their credibility was gone, and I remained untouched. Till last, it came to a breaking point, a final family gathering, meant to salvage some shred of dignity. They arrived tense, fractured, barely speaking to one another. Their eyes darted to me as though searching for a crack, a weakness, a flaw they could still exploit. But I gave them nothing. Instead, I simply stood and laid down the truth, piece by piece, the documents, the recordings, the transactions, each one undeniable, each one a mirror reflecting their own deceit. By the time I finished, the room was silent, not a defiant silence, not a victorious one, but the silence of defeat, and in that silence, I understood what my grandmother had meant. Truth had endured, and I had endured with it. They left that night in shame, their empire of lies scattered to ashes, and I, for the first time, breathed freely. The estate was mine, not just by law, not just by paper, but by right, because I had protected it, because I had protected myself, because I had proven worthy of the trust my grandmother had placed in me. But as I stood in the quiet halls of the estate, her letter still clutched in my hand, I also knew this: victory does not erase scars. The betrayal of family does not fade easily, and yet there was a strange comfort in knowing I had not just survived their envy, I had risen above it. I should have known they wouldn't surrender. People like Samuel and Evelyn don't accept defeat. They claw, they scrape, they burn everything around them before admitting they've lost. So when the investigations opened, when their reputations shattered, when their allies fled, I knew the danger wasn't over. It was only changing shape. The first sign came quietly. A rumor whispered by a neighbor. A shadow lingering at the edge of the estate's grounds. A car parked too long on the street at night. I recognized the signs. They weren't plotting in boardrooms anymore. They were plotting in the dark. Then it happened. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, I returned home to find the estate doors ajar. Not smashed, this time open carefully, deliberately. The air inside was too still, and when I stepped into the hall, I saw them, Samuel, Evelyn, and two of the younger cousins, standing together like a broken army. Desperation etched on every face. "This ends tonight," Evelyn said, her voice tight, her mask of elegance long since cracked. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak, because I had been expecting this. They accused me again. Said the will was a forgery, that I had manipulated the lawyers, that everything was a grand deception. The same tired words, but with a new edge, desperation sharpened to violence. Samuel slammed his hand on the table, his voice shaking with fury. "You don't understand," he growled. This estate belongs to us. You can't just walk away with everything while we're left with nothing." I looked at him steadily. "Nothing. You had everything once: name, wealth, opportunities. But envy rotted it. And now you call it nothing because you destroyed it yourselves." The word struck him harder than any blow could. Evelyn stepped forward then, pulling a folder from her bag and slamming it onto the table. Inside were documents, contracts, agreements, false papers they had fabricated to prove their claim to the estate. Her smile was cold. "The courts will believe us. And even if they don't, we'll drag this through the mud until your name is ruined. Do you really think anyone will respect you once we're done?" I let the silence stretch, let them believe for one final moment that they held the upper hand. Then I reached into my coat and placed my own folder on the table. It was thicker, heavier. Inside was everything. I had gathered: real contracts, real bank trails, recordings, testimonies, and most importantly, the sealed letter from my grandmother. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and read the words aloud. "This estate is to pass wholly and without condition to my granddaughter. I make this decision not out of favoritism, but because she alone has shown loyalty, integrity, and care for this family's legacy. Should any relative contest this decision, know that their claim comes not from right, but from envy. And envy is not an heir." The words echoed through the hall like a verdict. Evelyn's face drained of color. Samuel's fist shook at his sides. The younger cousins exchanged nervous glances, doubt flickering in their eyes, because this was not just my voice. This was grandmother's voice, and it was final. Still, Samuel lunged forward, fury overtaking reason. But he didn't reach me, because the doors opened, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. I had called them hours earlier, when I saw the signs. When I knew the confrontation was inevitable. The officers didn't ask questions. They had the documents, the evidence, the reports of fraud and harassment. They knew who they were here for. And one by one, my cousins were led out of the estate. Their final gamble had failed before it began. I stood alone in the hall again, the echoes of their shouts fading into silence. The house felt different now. Not heavy, not haunted, but clean. Like the storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and clear. Yet even then, as relief washed over me, I knew there was still one twist left in this story. Because victory is never as simple as watching your enemies fall. It is living with the knowledge of what they did, of what they could have destroyed, of how close they came. It is knowing that family can wound deeper than strangers ever could, and it is deciding what to do with the scars they leave behind. I walked into grandmother's study, her letter still in my hand, her words played again in my mind. Truth, patience, endurance. She had known all along. She had seen what they would become. But she had also seen me, and she had trusted me to carry the weight of her legacy. Not just the estate, but the lesson that loyalty outlasts envy, that integrity outshines greed, and that truth, no matter how battered, always endures. The estate was quiet again, not the uneasy quiet of waiting for an attack, not the suffocating quiet of watching shadows move against me, but a calm, steady quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned, the kind that follows a storm. For the first time in months, I walked the halls without glancing over my shoulder. I opened the doors without bracing myself for what might be waiting on the other side. The estate had always been vast, beautiful, but for so long it had felt like a prison. Now, it felt like home. News of the cousins' downfall spread quickly. Their names, once spoken with admiration in certain circles, were now tainted with scandal, fraud, deceit, betrayal. They tried, Of course, to salvage themselves. Samuel cried foul, claimed conspiracy. Evelyn attempted to vanish behind silence, hoping the storm would move on without her. But truth lingers, and their truth was rotten. The family name, though bruised, was not beyond repair. Because grandmother's words had not been buried, they had been preserved. Her letter, her will, her voice, they spoke louder than the cousins' lies ever could. People listened, and in time, they began to see that the estate was not just brick and stone, not just wealth and power. It was legacy, and legacy belongs to those who honor it, not those who covet it. Still, victory carried weight. Night, when the halls grew too quiet, I felt the scars of betrayal pressing against me. I replayed their words, their venom, their fury. I wondered if things could have been different. If envy could have been softened by love. If loyalty could have been stronger than greed. But those were dangerous thoughts, because the truth is, not every story of family has reconciliation at its end. Some have distance, some have silence, and some, like mine, have scars that will never fade but no longer bleed. Then there was Daniel, the one who had wavered, who had followed but never fully believed, who had called me in secret to confess the fractures before they grew too wide. When the others fell, I expected him to vanish, to swallowed by shame or guilt, or simply fear. But he didn't. He came to me one evening, standing on the doorstep of the estate like a boy again, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered. I didn't stop them, he said quietly. I could have, but I didn't. I stood by while they tried to ruin you. There was no excuse in his voice, no defense, only truth, and I found I respected that. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I opened grandmother's letter again. The words etched into my memory but heavier now in my hands. Loyalty may not shine immediately, she had written, but in time, it outlasts envy. Perhaps Daniel had not been loyal from the start. Perhaps his silence had caused harm, but in the end, he had chosen truth, and maybe that counted for something. I won't forget what you didn't do, I told him at last. But I also won't ignore what you did. You came forward when it mattered. That's more than the others can say. His eyes lifted slowly, hope flickering like a candle. I don't want the estate, he said quickly. I don't want anything. I don't want to lose family. The word stuck. Family.it was the wound that had cut deepest in all of this. The knowledge that the people meant to protect me had been the ones to wound me. But maybe, just maybe, not all of them were lost. I didn't answer him that night. I couldn't, but I didn't close the door either, and that, I think, was its own kind of answer. The days that followed were quieter still. I began to walk the gardens again, touching the roses grandmother had planted, running my hand along the ivy curling over the stone walls. The estate no longer felt like a battleground. It felt alive again, like her presence lingered, not in the halls where the cousins had shouted, not in the papers where her will had been contested, but in the soil, in the air, in the roots of the legacy she had built. And I carried her words with me, not just the letter, but the lesson that truth, though battered, endures, that envy destroys itself, that loyalty, though tested, survives, and that sometimes revenge is not fire and fury. Sometimes it is patience, sometimes it is silence, sometimes it is simply standing when others fall. The estate was quiet, yet it felt alive in a way it never had before. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving behind only truth, only legacy, only the weight of lessons learned. I walked through the halls, touching the polished wood, the crystal chandeliers, The portraits that had watched silently over generations. Grandmother had left me more than a house, more than wealth. She had left me a life lesson carved in every corner. Loyalty outlasts envy. Truth endures, and patience is a weapon sharper than any blade. That morning, I went to her study one last time. The letter she had written, the one that had guided me through every attack. Every lie, every betrayal lay on the desk. I traced her handwriting with my fingers, remembering her voice, her wisdom, her unwavering faith in me. I whispered, I made it through. I didn't just survive. I stood tall, just like you taught me. The house seemed to answer me with silence, but it was the kind of silence that carries pride. Daniel had come by earlier that week. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for anything. He had simply returned, willing to see the family not as enemies, but as fractured pieces that might yet be pieced together. I realized then that revenge is not just about defeating those who wrong you. It is about reclaiming yourself. It is about standing in the ruins of betrayal and declaring, I am not broken. I am home. And in that moment, I understood why grandmother had trusted me, because surviving envy, betrayal, and deceit requires more than cunning. It requires strength of heart. I decided to honor her in the only way that felt right. I walked into the grand garden she had tended herself. The roses she had planted, the ivy curling like slow tendrils around the stone walls. I knelt before the largest rosebush, its blooms bright and defiant, and I whispered a promise, not to take revenge, not to dwell in anger, but to carry her legacy forward. To protect what she had built. To ensure that truth, loyalty, and patience were remembered long after the chaos of envy had faded. The cousins were gone from my life now, each left to face the consequences of their greed. Some tried to rebuild. Some faded from public view entirely, but none returned. And I didn't pursue them, because revenge had never been about punishment. It had been about justice, and justice, when carried patiently and truthfully, does not need my hands, it carries itself. I returned to the study and placed grandmother's letter back in its envelope, sealing it carefully. It had served its purpose, but the lessons within it would remain with me forever. I looked out the window at the estate, bathed in golden sunlight, and I smiled. Not a smile of triumph over others, but a smile of survival, of endurance, of knowing that even in the face of betrayal, I had chosen to rise, and that was the ultimate victory. Later, when I walked through the gardens again, Daniel appeared quietly at the edge of the terrace. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, I don't know if we can ever be a family again, but I want to try. I nodded. It won't be easy. It will take time. But truth and loyalty, they are stronger than greed. If you remember that, maybe we can rebuild something real. And for the first time, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift. The estate, the inheritance, the betrayals, they were all behind me. Ahead of me was clarity, strength, and the freedom that comes from enduring and rising above. I took a deep breath and let the sunlight wash over me, feeling my grandmother's presence in every corner of the estate, in every flower, in every brick. I had inherited more than property. I had inherited courage. I had inherited wisdom. And I had inherited the knowledge that even in a world filled with envy and deceit, patience, truth, and loyalty would always prevail. And so, standing there in the golden light, I knew one undeniable truth. Revenge is not about ruin. It is about rising. Rising above betrayal. Rising above envy. Rising above the chaos to reclaim your own strength, your own peace, and your own legacy. and that is a victory no one can take away. Alright everyone, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. If you enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe. Have a great day or night, and I'll see you next time.